Look, a great deal of variance in the estimates of the numbers of protesters, but you talk about the context of who's protesting and you talk of newcomers. Contextualize for me who is protesting and why is this different this time to 2018?
Well, the first thing is that we're starting to see a large number of first-time protesters come out. By some estimates, it was about 45% of the crowd. And that's important because, in Russia, you have seen a hardcore of oppositionists, of people who already are kind of opposed to the Kremlin, who are willing to go out on demonstrations and face arrests and all that sort of thing. Whereas this time, the crowd is being substantially bolstered by people who are kind of new converts to the cause. And they tend to be in the 18 to 30 range. These are all preliminary estimates. That's obviously important because, it's just new people demonstrating that, coming off the fence and demonstrating that they're no longer willing to accept the political situation in Russia. The second point is where the protests have been happening. Protests in Moscow and St. Petersburg, while these ones were unusually large scale, they're not necessarily that out of the ordinary. The fact that these protests were across the country shows the organizational power and cross-Russian appeal of the Navalny cause, yeah.
You would say, though, that this takes Navalny from being a marginal, unimportant figure, as it were, in the psyche of Russians to something much more present. What do you mean by that?
Well, it's not necessarily that he was a marginal figure. It's certainly the case that the Kremlin had tried to make him one. There was this unofficial policy of refusing to even mention his name on state television. But now that, he's been arrested and the reaction to that has been so strong, that's really no longer a tenable policy. So they've gone from trying to ignore him to really vicious denunciation of him. And that demonstrates that Putin is not, Putin likes to portray himself as above the fray, as kind of a leader without equal, that there are no other real political forces in Russia or alternative political leaders. Now they have to admit that Navalny is a challenger. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that Navalny is likely to become president anytime soon, but he has become a symbol for a lot of Russians of an alternative political reality. And that's very important because, one of the things that the regime has relied upon is this idea that there is no alternative, that, that you can protest against Putin, you can protest against the political system, but the alternative is, unknowable or chaos. What you're seeing now is the fact that there's a clear alternative figure, a clear alternative vision of what Russia can be, or at least a symbolic one. And that's dangerous if you're the leader of a political system that depends in a large part on apathy and acceptance rather than direct repression.
Do you think that Putin will release Navalny? Could you see that happening as a policy of appeasement to the protesters, or would it embolden the protesters?
It's extremely unlikely. This is a political system that does not like to admit mistakes, first off. And if they did release Navalny, it's not like he'd kind of decide to retire suddenly. He'd continue to be an extremely powerful opposition force and an extremely effective organizer. So no, we would expect that they will keep him in jail for the foreseeable future, try to prevent him from continuing to communicate with his people, from organizing nationwide, and that they'll go after the rest of his organization with gusto at this point. This is a struggle that's been going on for years, and I don't think the Kremlin is going to let up now.